Yahar meat hearties. Welcome back to another Dungeons & Dragons video. Today's topic is loot. Everyone's favorite thing is loot, whether it's 16,000 pounds of gold coins, or it's Sir Goriath's Sword of Annihilation. Loot can range from just about any sort of magic item, or perhaps it doesn't even need to be magic. It could just be a cool little statue that goes for a handsome price at your local pawn shop. Where of course they will lowball you for the statue for about 5 copper pieces, just like a GameStop game trade-in. The problem with Dungeons & Dragons loot is it is a very hard thing to get right as a dungeon master. Oftentimes your players will want to investigate a lot, and you can't really predict where they're going to investigate unless it is a, adventure-specific thing. If you mention a rock on the side of the road and perhaps your player wants to go investigate it, and they roll really good, and you feel a little bad that that roll might go to waste, and you want to put something there, what do you put there? Or perhaps a better example is a thorough investigation of a lost dungeon. Do you want every corner to have absolutely nothing in it, or are you gonna sprinkle in a little bit of loot? There's a lot of things to think about when providing loot to your players. So let's cover a couple of the problems and then get into a couple of solutions. One of the problems Dungeon Masters run into is the question of whether or not to randomize the loot or to just tailor-make it for your players. For example, you have a paladin, so why not give them more paladin-like items? That's kind of the general school of thought here. But also, why not just randomize it? Everyone gets a fair chance of getting something fun and wacky and powerful, or Time Orb. We love Time Orb. Tackling these sort of issues is very dependent upon what kind of players you're playing with and what kind of dungeon master you are. But at a base level, let's give you a couple of basic things that you should just consider when providing loot for your players. Say your players are fighting a very powerful, interesting creature with a very powerful and interesting weapon, or even spell for that matter. Chances are your players are going to want that weapon or spell. And this is a very easy thing to overlook. Perhaps you didn't consider the fact that your Minotaur is holding a cool looking axe, that your Barbarian might take interest in it. So when you are creating a creature with a weapon of any sort, and it has any sort of special ability, even if that ability is literally just 1 dice of extra damage, consider just the fact that your players might want to look into it. Have nearby a just scratched out stat block for that weapon. It doesn't even have to be anything crazy. Even if it is magical, perhaps just extra lightning damage. But when it gets into the player's hands, you can then elaborate on it further later down the line. Players like to make arsenals of weapons, so keep that in mind next time there is a large hulking minotaur holding a large flaming axe of destruction. Now the question is, the random loot versus the curated loot. What should you do? This depends on a lot of factors that you should keep in mind. Perhaps your party is early on in their levels, single digits. So randomizing the loot would actually be just fine, no matter the situation really, because you are giving them a very large pool of stuff to get, and there's a very large pool of common or uncommon magical items out there. And in early levels, it's very common for players to experiment with these wacky, silly little items that you usually would not get the chance to otherwise. At higher levels, your players might be a little more experienced, a little more acquainted with general D&D magical items and loot, so giving them a more curated experience might be preferable for them. Especially since when you are randomizing higher level loot, if that's what you're going for here, there's a much higher chance they're going to get something that is very crazy. So if that's your intention, then there's no problem. But if you want to control how powerful your party is, you might just want to look towards curating the loot yourself. Or even better, here's a solution, a free solution for you right now. Instead of giving your party loot, still give them the loot, but all in the form of coins, doubloons, pirate gold. Consider this their free Visa gift card that they get to use to buy what they want. Perhaps outside the dungeon, they come across a traveling merchant who only sells by request. So they can ask him for an item, and if he has it, which is up to you, just in case you don't want to give your paladin the Avenger right off the bat, This is a way of not only curating the loot, but allowing the players to express what they're looking for, what kind of magical item they want for their character, to perhaps insinue more fun shenanigans on their end. Merchants and traveling merchants shouldn't be underestimated in any aspect when giving your players loot, because it is a very controlled environment, but it makes it feel more natural than just being like, hey, this sword I asked the dungeon master for about a week ago, it's now just laying against the wall in the dungeon. Purchasing it from a guy who just has a big arsenal of things feels like, yeah, that fits. He's a merchant, he has things. And it's also a good way to burn gold off the party, especially if you just gave them 16 million coins. Now, the one big problem with this traveling merchant/merchant sort of deal here is if your players are extremely familiar with magical items, they might want to metagame with their items. They might want to make these insane combos, and if you're okay with that, then that's fine. There, again, is no problem here. But if you are worried about your players suddenly doing 20d12 damage per turn, you might want to look into what they're buying and what class they are, and just kind of seeing like, hey, is there any just crazy synergy here that they're going to nuke half the planet with? And lastly, if there isn't anything your players particularly want, say, they enter the shop or they find the traveling merchant, and they have all this gold and they're just like, man, I don't know what magical item I want. Then perhaps you're looking for something a little more curated to your tastes. Perhaps you're looking for something unique. Which is why I made a video about homebrew, which you can find on one of these corners, I always forget which, where I had already made a video about homebrew and how to make it. Sort of. Kind of. It's a pretty useful video though, you should watch it. But generally, homebrew is a good way of having your players have a more curated experience to what they want. If they just want a magical item that does whatever they want, say they have a cool glove that shoots lightning or say casts shocking grasp, then let them have it. Of course, if it's appropriate. Dungeons & Dragons is a game all about you and the player. You create a story, you create the loot, let them have fun, let them make up stuff. It's a game of make-believe already, why not just add a little more make-believe? I hope this video was helpful to you. I hope it was something. Oh. Turn me back around, come on. We got this. There we go. Have a good day. Adios.